The neighborhood of Willow Bend had been built on speed. Houses popped up like mushrooms after rain, all beige siding and tidy driveways. The kind of place where a realtor's drone photo looked like someone had stamped and pasted the same home again and again. Families came because it was affordable, because it was close enough to Houston, because the brochures promised good schools and safe sidewalks. What they didn't say was how empty the nights felt once the contractors left, or how the land itself seemed to remember what it had been before. Flat, sun-baked prairie where the wind had room to howl. When I moved in with my daughter Julia, I wanted that promise of safety. After my divorce, I needed it to be ordinary. Cul-de-sacs filled with tricycles, porches strung with fairy lights, neighbors nodding over recycling bins. Willow Bend looked exactly like what I thought I wanted. At first, it was quiet enough to lull me into believing things were normal. The first few weeks were yard work, grocery runs, Julia riding her scooter in wide circles until the sun sank. She made friends quickly, joining a pack of kids who gathered near the retention pond at dusk. The pond wasn't much, a shallow oval ringed by cattails and warning signs about no swimming, no fishing, no pets. It was mostly for flood control, but the kids treated it like a landmark. They called it the Circle. They said if you walked around it 3 times after sunset, you'd hear your name whispered. I laughed it off the first time Julia told me. Kids invent things, I thought, but there was a gleam in her eyes that made me uneasy. The same look she had when she used to lie about finishing her homework. It was about a month in when the first neighbor vanished. His name was Curtis, a father of 2 who liked mowing his lawn twice a week. His wife posted on the community Facebook group that he'd gone jogging after dinner and hadn't come back. The sheriff's office sent a couple of cars, but by morning, all they said was that he'd probably left on his own. The neighborhood shrugged uneasily. Casserole dishes passed around like bandages for the silence. But I couldn't shake the image of his sneakers lined up by the door when I dropped off a card. They were there. Where had he gone running without them? A week later, Julia came home pale. She wouldn't eat her chicken nuggets, just sat at the table fiddling with the crust. The circle said his name, she whispered finally. I asked what she meant and her little hands trembled. Curtis. We went around it 3 times. It whispered Curtis. And then something splashed. I grounded her, forbade her from going near the pond. She nodded, but her eyes darted toward the window, and I knew she'd sneak out if she could. That night, I dreamed of walking around the pond myself. The cattails brushed my legs, and the water was dark as motor oil. I woke up drenched in sweat, the sound of splashing still ringing in my ears. Then more people began to vanish. A woman from 2 streets over, a teenager walking his dog, always at night, always without much explanation. The HOA sent out emails insisting everything was fine, citing isolated incidents and no confirmed criminal activity. But the mood on the block shifted. Garage doors closed earlier, blinds snapped shut before dark. I noticed Julia's friends dwindling. One girl moved suddenly, another stopped being allowed outside. Still, the circle remained. Children whispered about it like a dare. Adults avoided saying anything at all. One evening, I was dragging the trash bins to the curb when I heard it. My name, carried soft on the humid air. Not shouted, not spoken. Whispered from the direction of the pond. I froze, my hands slick on the plastic handle. The street was empty, porches dark, but the sound came again. Sarah, drawn out like a breath underwater. I dropped the bin and ran inside. The next morning, the grass around the pond was damp as though it had rained, though the sky had been clear for days. My neighbor Sidra, who taught at the elementary school, knocked on my door. She looked exhausted, shadows under her eyes. "Do you hear it too?" she asked. When I didn't answer fast enough, she grabbed my wrist. "Don't go near it, Sarah. Don't let Julia near it. It takes who it calls." I wanted to believe she was just unraveling from stress, but her grip left crescent moons in my skin. That night, Julia screamed in her sleep. When I ran to her room, she was thrashing, whispering words I couldn't understand. Only one came clear: circle. I locked every door, double-checked the windows. Still, at 3:33 a.m., I woke to the sound of water rushing under the floorboards. The house trembled, as though the foundation itself had softened. In the silence afterward, the whisper returned, louder, almost coaxing. "Sarah, bring her!" I couldn't take it anymore. The next day, I packed an overnight bag for Julia and drove toward my sister's house in Dallas. But the further I got from Willow Bend, the thicker the air seemed to grow, like I was driving through invisible molasses. The GPS spun. The gas gauge dropped faster than it should have. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, for just a heartbeat, the suburban streets stretched endlessly behind me, repeating themselves like a loop. Julia slept in the passenger seat, but her lips moved, whispering a name I couldn't hear. I turned around. My hands shook so badly I nearly missed the exit. When I pulled into our driveway, Julia woke, smiling faintly, as if she'd been waiting to come back. "It doesn't like when you leave," she said. The sheriff stopped patrolling after that. The Facebook group went silent except for the HOA's cheery updates about neighborhood barbecues. And then, one by one, more neighbors disappeared until half the houses on our block were empty. No moving vans, no for sale signs, just blinds drawn, driveways bare. When I asked Sidra, she said they hadn't moved. "They're in the circle now," she whispered. Last week, Julia vanished from her bed. I found her out by the pond at dawn, standing barefoot in the mud, staring at her reflection. The water rippled, though there was no breeze. When I called her name, her reflection didn't move with her. It smiled. "I don't know how long we can stay here. The pond isn't just a retention basin. It's something older, something that uses our tidy streets as camouflage. It calls names until you answer, until you step into the water and join the reflection waiting beneath. The HOA doesn't fight it. Maybe they've always known. Maybe Willow Bend was built not on land, but on an agreement. Every night the whispers come earlier. Last night it wasn't my name. It was Julia's. And when she hears it, her eyes glaze with a strange calm, as if she belongs to it more than she belongs to me. I can't tell if leaving is even possible anymore. The streets curl back on themselves. The gas pumps flicker out when I try. We're ringed by cul-de-sacs, by sameness, by that circle at the center swallowing whoever it chooses. The quiet here isn't empty. It's patient. It waits until we can't resist. Tonight, I hear it again, louder than ever, curling through the walls, soaking into the carpet, lapping at the edges of the house like a tide. Julia is already standing by the back door. She doesn't look at me when she whispers. It's time, and outside, under the white Texas moon, the pond waits, still and black, reflecting a world that is not quite ours, where everyone who left still walks, waving from the opposite shore. In Oak Hollow, a suburb just north of Dallas, the nights carried a peculiar stillness. It was the kind of place where lawns were clipped with military precision, porch lights timed to switch on at dusk, and the sound of tires on the cul-de-sac echoed longer than seemed normal. Families moved there for safety, for the schools, for the sense of order. I thought it was perfect when we arrived. After years of renting noisy apartments, our new house on Golden Elm Lane felt like an achievement, a place to build something steady for my wife Erin and our son, Caleb. But order has a way of hiding things, and Oak Hollow hid more than anyone ever told us. The first sign was the streetlight. Every night around 1:13 a.m., without fail, the bulbs on Golden Elm Lane flickered in sequence. They didn't go out at once, but one by one down the road, a ripple of darkness until the entire street lay in shadow. Then, just as suddenly, they snapped back on in reverse order, as if someone had dragged a hand across a row of switches. The HOA sent a cheerful email explaining it was a scheduled systems check, but no one ever came to repair anything. And it happened, whether the sky was clear or storming. Caleb was the first to notice something beneath the flicker. He was only 8, prone to staring at things most people ignored. One morning at breakfast, he said, "The man in the ditch waves at me when the lights go out." Erin and I exchanged the kind of smile you give a child when you hope it's just imagination. But later that week, when the flicker came, I glanced through the blinds and thought I saw movement near the storm drain by the corner. Just a shadow, I told myself, but it clung in my mind. The neighbors didn't talk about it. They mowed, they waved, they brought bundt cakes to HOA meetings. But when I asked about the lights, their smiles grew stiff. "It's just how things are here," said a man 2 houses down, and he shut his garage door mid-conversation. Erin thought I was imagining it, until she found Caleb sleepwalking one night, his bare feet wet with grass, standing at the edge of the curb. He kept whispering, "I have to go where they live." We started locking his bedroom door at night. Still, every morning his sheets were damp, and little flecks of mud dotted the carpet. I set up the security camera on the porch. At 1:13 exactly, the street went dark on the feed, the picture filled with static. When the lights came back, the timestamp jumped 2 minutes ahead, and Caleb's bedroom light glowed faintly, though his door had never opened. Erin wanted to call the police, but what would we report? That a boy sleepwalked and some streetlights flickered. I convinced myself to handle it alone. One night I stayed up and waited outside as the hour drew near. The cicadas screamed until the first bulb died, and then their chorus cut off mid-note. One by one, darkness crawled down Golden Elm Lane. The houses seemed to lean inward, their shutters like closed eyes. At the last flicker, I heard water rushing under the ground, though no rain had fallen in weeks. Then something shifted in the storm drain. Pale fingers curled over the edge, slick with grime, gripping the concrete lip as if pulling upward. I froze. The rest of it never came into view, just the suggestion of shoulders, a head bowed too low, a form too big to fit into the narrow ditch. And though I couldn't see its face, I swear it looked directly at me. My knees weakened, and before I knew it, the light snapped back on. The ditch was empty. The next day, I found an envelope taped to our front door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in a bland font. Keep your windows closed at night. It knows who watches. No signature. No HOA letterhead, just that. I asked Erin if she'd seen anyone deliver it, but she shook her head. Caleb, overhearing, muttered, "They're helping me," and went back to colouring. By the second month, Oak Hollow felt wrong in daylight too. The yards were too green despite the heat. Sprinklers sprayed but never dripped on sidewalks. Children laughed in backyards. Yet I rarely saw them out front anymore. Erin admitted she hadn't slept through the night in weeks. She said she sometimes woke to the sound of whispering beneath the floorboards, as though the foundation itself had voices. One afternoon, Sidra from across the street stopped me as I wheeled the trash bin out. She looked thinner than before, her eyes restless. "You need to take your boy and leave," she whispered. I asked why, and she glanced at the ditch, then back at me. "They like children best. That's how they grow." Before I could press her, her husband came out and pulled her inside, scolding her loud enough for me to hear. The blinds slammed shut. That night, Caleb disappeared. His locked door stood wide open, sheets crumpled, window cracked though it had child-proof latches. Erin's scream woke the block. We tore through the house, the yard, shouting his name until our throats shredded. The neighbours came with flashlights, but their faces looked hollow, resigned. One man shook his head before we even finished explaining. The police arrived, wrote their notes, asked routine questions. They searched the pond at the end of the subdivision and the nearby fields. No sign of him. By dawn, they left us with a number for a detective. Erin sat on the curb sobbing into her hands. I couldn't stop staring at the storm drain. At 1:13 the following night, I was waiting again. The street flickered out, one bulb after another. The air thickened, pressing into my chest. From the drain, water surged, though no rain had fallen, spilling onto the curb in a black trickle. Then I heard it, Caleb's voice, thin, muffled, calling, "Dad, come down." I ran forward, dropping to my knees at the grate. The water reeked of rust and mold. I could see nothing below but darkness. "Caleb!" I shouted. "I'm here!" His voice came again, but it wasn't right. It stretched, layered, as though a dozen mouths tried to shape his words at once. "Dad, come down, come down, come down!" Hands erupted from the dark, pale and slick, pressing against the grate. Too many fingers. Nails cracked and blackened. I staggered back, heart hammering. The streetlight surged back on, blinding me. When my eyes cleared, the drain was empty again. Only the faint echo of rushing water remained. Erin left the next morning. She couldn't take it anymore. She went to her sister's in Austin, begging me to follow. But I stayed. I couldn't leave Caleb, not if there was even a chance he was alive down there. Days blurred. Nights became rituals of waiting. Every 1:13, I stood by the drain, listening. Sometimes it was his voice. Sometimes it was others calling names I didn't know. Sometimes they whispered mine. The houses around me emptied. One by one, families left without for sale signs, their windows boarded up overnight. Only a few of us remained, pale shapes drifting to our curbs each night like moths drawn to a flame. None of us spoke anymore. We just listened. Last night, the whisper was different. Not coaxing, not mocking. It said, "You've watched long enough. It's time." The grate rattled. The water rose higher, black and slick, spilling across the street like a tide. In the reflection of the puddles, I saw faces, neighbors, children, even Curtis, staring up with hollow eyes. And in the center, Caleb, smiling faintly, reaching for me. Tonight, I will go down. I know the lights will flicker soon. The street will darken in its ripple. The ditch will swell, and the hands will rise. Maybe I'll find him. Maybe I'll finally understand what Oak Hollow was built for. All I know is that the suburb is emptying, house by house. And the only ones who remain are those who listen when the lights go out. The quiet here isn't natural. It's the breath before something speaks. And when it does, you have no choice but to answer. In Meadow Glen, a suburb on the northern edge of Houston, every house was fresh brick and stone. Their driveways wide enough for 2 trucks. Their lawns trimmed to identical lengths. Families were drawn in by promises of good schools, community pools, and a sprawling park at the center with a playground shaped like a castle. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved while pushing strollers, where barbecues happened on schedule, and where silence after 10 o'clock was an unspoken law. When my wife Marissa and I moved in with our son Owen, it felt like safety. After years of apartment noise and city sirens, Meadow Glen was a lullaby of cicadas and sprinklers. But the silence here wasn't peace. It was something else holding its breath. Our first weeks felt normal. We met the neighbors at a block party, shook hands with HOA board members who handed out flyers about pool rules and curfew hours for teens. Owen disappeared into the pack of kids, chasing soccer balls through cul-de-sacs and climbing the castle at dusk. The parents drank light beer and talked about property values. No one mentioned the strange way the streetlights buzzed louder when the sky went fully dark, or how the air seemed heavier in the park after sundown. The first incident was small. A neighbor's dog, a golden retriever, bolted during an evening walk near the park and never came back. Flyers went up, but no one found so much as a paw print. A week later, another pet disappeared. Cats stopped roaming. Children were called home earlier. People whispered coyotes, though the subdivision was too deep in development for that. Marissa shrugged it off, but I noticed the way Owen paused at the window after dark, staring toward the park. "Someone's in the castle at night," he said one evening. "They keep the lights off, but I see them." I told him it was probably teenagers sneaking out. He shook his head. "They don't move like people." I dismissed it as imagination. But later that week, when I drove home late from work, I saw what he meant. The playground castle stood under a single flickering street lamp. At the highest tower, something shifted against the dark, too tall for a child, too thin for an adult. The figure bent backward in a way that made my stomach tighten, then vanished into shadow. By the time I parked and ran toward it, the tower was empty. At the next HOA meeting, I tried to ask. The board president, a plump man with perfect teeth, cut me off with a laugh. "Don't worry about the park at night," he said, as if it were a private joke. His smile didn't touch his eyes. Things escalated in August. Owen came home one afternoon, his clothes damp, his hair plastered to his forehead. He said some of the kids dared each other to climb into the castle after sunset. "It smells like wet dirt inside," he whispered. "Like the ground's still alive." He wouldn't eat dinner. That night, he woke up screaming. When I reached his room, he was on the floor, pointing at the closet. "It followed me home," he sobbed. The closet was empty, but his shoes, neatly lined an hour earlier, were soaked as if he'd stepped in mud. The next day, I went to the park in daylight. The castle was just plastic and wood, slides gleaming in the sun, swings creaking in the breeze. But when I stepped inside one of the hollow towers, the air cooled sharply, damp and foul like a basement. Scratched into the wall, under layers of faded paint, were names. Dozens of them, carved with keys or nails, overlapping and worn. Some I recognized from the missing pet flyers, but they weren't pet names, they were children. That evening, I told Marissa we should leave. She thought I was overreacting, that stress from work was making me see things. "It's a neighborhood, not a horror movie," she said. But she didn't hear the whispering in the walls at night, the faint scrape like something dragging across drywall. She didn't see Owen's eyes glaze when he passed the park on our drives, his hand twitching toward the window as if pulled. We started locking his bedroom door at night. Still, every morning his sheets were damp, and little flecks of mud dotted the carpet. I set up the security camera on the porch. At 1:13 exactly, the street went dark on the feed, the picture filled with static. When the lights came back, the timestamp jumped 2 minutes ahead, and Caleb's bedroom light glowed faintly, though his door had never opened. Erin wanted to call the police, but what would we report? That a boy sleepwalked and some streetlights flickered. I convinced myself to handle it alone. One night I stayed up and waited outside as the hour drew near. The cicadas screamed until the first bulb died, and then their chorus cut off mid-note. One by one, darkness crawled down Golden Elm Lane. The houses seemed to lean inward, their shutters like closed eyes. At the last flicker, I heard water rushing under the ground, though no rain had fallen in weeks. Then something shifted in the storm drain. Pale fingers curled over the edge, slick with grime, gripping the concrete lip as if pulling upward. I froze. The rest of it never came into view, just the suggestion of shoulders, a head bowed too low, a form too big to fit into the narrow ditch. And though I couldn't see its face, I swear it looked directly at me. My knees weakened, and before I knew it, the light snapped back on. The ditch was empty. The next day, I found an envelope taped to our front door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in a bland font. "Keep your windows closed at night. It knows who watches." No signature. No HOA letterhead, just that. I asked Erin if she'd seen anyone deliver it, but she shook her head. Caleb, overhearing, muttered, "They're helping me," and went back to colouring. By the second month, Oak Hollow felt wrong in daylight too. The yards were too green despite the heat. Sprinklers sprayed but never dripped on sidewalks. Children laughed in backyards, yet I rarely saw them out front anymore. Erin admitted she hadn't slept through the night in weeks. She said she sometimes woke to the sound of whispering beneath the floorboards, as though the foundation itself had voices. One afternoon, Sidra from across the street stopped me as I wheeled the trash bin out. She looked thinner than before, her eyes restless. "You need to take your boy and leave," she whispered. I asked why, and she glanced at the ditch, then back at me. "They like children best. That's how they grow." Before I could press her, her husband came out and pulled her inside, scolding her loud enough for me to hear. The blinds slammed shut. That night, Caleb disappeared. His locked door stood wide open, sheets crumpled, window cracked though it had child-proof latches. Erin screamed.